Hi folks, I'm really sorry that I can't be in today, but obviously one of the benefits of this pandemic is we now have tried and tested methods to teach you anyway. um, so what we were going to be doing today is I was going to be reminding you about essays, what they're about, how to write them. And I was going to also introduce two things that we haven't yet worried about in our geography essays, neither of which are particularly difficult, but you do sort of need somebody to explain them to you. Okay, if you're using this for revision, then everything applies. Obviously, the introduction won't make much sense, but this is January 2022, and for the second time I have COVID, so I am not physically able to be at college, but everything I'm going to tell you about essays remains true anyway. Okay, so quite a lot of what I'm going to say will be repetition of things that theoretically you already know. Obviously you can pause, rewind or whatever. I'm going to go reasonably quickly through those bits, but as I said, you can go back if you need to. Okay, now this is 2022 as I'm speaking, and we are not exactly sure what your exams are going to look like in the summer. What is on the screen at the moment is like a normal year. Your third exam tests your knowledge of year 2 modules, and you write an essay for each of the 3 modules, so tectonics, weather and climate, and development in an African context. But we don't quite know in 2022 if that's going to be the same for you this year or not. We are currently assuming that it will be, and then we will obviously make changes if that's the case. So your year 2 knowledge will be entirely assessed by 3 essays, 1 per module. You really should plan. I know some people are massively reluctant, partly because of a timing issue, partly because I don't think everyone sees the benefit of planning an essay, but I examine this paper and I can honestly promise you that the people who've done a brief plan before they start writing generally end up with better marks because they've organised their thoughts. Please do not skip the planning stage, folks, okay? Now, that's my sort of plea. The most important thing is in the orange box, to be honest. You have to have a sense of argument in your essays. It's one of the things that is massively, a big contributor to the mark scheme. Therefore, one of the things that you absolutely must do before you start writing is to figure out what is the argument going to be. And it might be more obvious for one of the essays than the other, in which case do the essay that you understand better. But that is a really crucial thing, right? What is the sense of argument? What can you say? And I will talk you through an example later on to sort of try and give you a sense of what I mean by that. So at the very least, you need to do that. But in an ideal world, you would also do something like this. This is my way of planning an essay. You might have your own, excuse me, from other subjects. You might take that and personalise it, whatever. But the beauty of that one is that it makes you think about having a 3-part structure: an introduction, a main body, and a conclusion. It also makes you think about the sense of argument by dividing the main body into 2 sections. And it gives you a space to think about what case studies you might use and things like that. But as I say, you don't have to use that. I just massively recommend at least organising your thoughts before you start writing. I would say having that time is better than using those extra few minutes to kind of just plough into the essay. I'll stop banging on about that, but you get the message. I'm a big believer in planning first, ladies and gents. So what goes in an introduction? This is the least important part of your essay, okay? We do not want it going on for too long. The conclusion is much, 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 much more important than the introduction. So we want one of these, but they're not the be all and end all, okay? 4 or 5 lines. What we would prefer you not to do is to repeat the question. The reason that people do that is because they don't know what else to say. So, you know, you read first lines. In this essay, I'm going to explain, da, 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 and you're like, good, because that's what you're supposed to do. It's not going to get you any marks. If you can use the introduction to define key terms, so let's say the essay title has the word hazard in it, define what a hazard is. If it's an essay about earthquakes, could you give some facts and figures about how many earthquakes we have each year, how many people live in earthquake hazard zones? It's that kind of thing, okay? But as I say, it's short, it's sweet, it's not the be all and end all. It should be there, but conclusions are far more important. Main body, okay, this is where you're going to get the majority of your marks, of course. And this is really where you're going to answer the question. So you develop your points as a series of paragraphs. Now, structuring paragraphs is something that people do find hard. And we have got the PEER technique to help us, P-E-E-R. And that will help you structure your paragraphs. Okay, so the first P is the point. I'll just see. Yes, I have. Haha. Is the point you want to make. So maybe you want to say that earthquakes that hit less developed countries have higher death tolls. Okay, maybe that's the point that you want to make. Usually it's a sentence. It's just, this is the key message I want to try and get across. The first E is where you take that and you explain it in as much detail as you possibly can. Why do earthquakes that hit less developed countries kill more people? You could talk about the quality of the buildings. You could talk about a lack of education of knowing what to do. You could talk about not having such good emergency services or emergency plans, that kind of thing. You then also want some evidence. Usually in geography, evidence comes from case studies. This is why we learn so many case studies, folks, because they are the evidence of what we're trying to prove. If your point was about death tolls in less developed countries, your ideal evidence would be to take an earthquake that hit a more developed country, an earthquake that hit a less developed country, compare the death tolls and talk about, why they're so different. Then the last sentence of your paragraph, some people say L and some people say R. It means the same thing. You are referring or linking back to the title. And what that does is it makes you stay focused on the question. What I used to do before I worked relentlessly on exam technique, because I really struggled with this when I was doing my A-levels, I used to sort of go off at tangents and just go down a rabbit hole about some weird thing about volcanoes or earthquakes and not quite ever come back to answering the question. That was my real issue. And this is what saved me. Linking or referring back to the question at the end of every paragraph. It will also give your answer a coherence, which the examiners like, and it just gives you a really nice structure. Okay, so that is a really good way of trying to do your main body. But obviously in your planning time, you need to think about, well, what key points am I going to make? What case studies might I use? This is why organising your thoughts before you write is pretty useful. Okay. Finally, we're going to get to a conclusion, and this is crucial. It's actually double credited in the mark scheme, and I'll emphasise this to you in a minute. You really, really cannot afford to run out of time for a conclusion. We're going to have to get disciplined with that, and as we get closer to the summer, we'll obviously start practicing exams in timed conditions more and more. And it's about knowing right, I've got this amount of time left, I need to start writing a conclusion, okay? Please, please do not miss these out because they're so important in the mark scheme. What we are doing is you are answering the question. So let's say the question is, to what extent can preparedness save lives? That's not a very good question, but it'll do for now. To what extent can preparedness save lives? At some point in the conclusion, you are actually going to have to say, in my opinion, preparedness is crucially important in saving lives. In my opinion, preparedness has a massive impact on how many lives are saved. So that's what I mean by directly answering the question, okay? You actually say, what's the extent, or which side of the argument wins, or whatever it happens to be. And it doesn't really matter what your opinion is, as long as it makes sense from the rest of the essay. So if in your main body you've been kind of going, well, death tolls are always higher in less developed countries, da 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 da, and then in the conclusion you completely contradict yourself, obviously that's not going to make a lot of sense. As long as the conclusion follows on from what you've been saying so far, it doesn't really matter what your opinion is. Okay, you can then recap your key points. I appreciate that in other subjects you might do, that is a big no-no. It's kind of like, no, do not repeat yourself. You are absolutely allowed to do that in geography. And then I've had a few chats with people recently who've said, you keep telling me to write more for my conclusion, Nikki, but what else could I write? Well, if you've directly answered the question, you've recapped your key points, and I'm still saying, I think you need a longer conclusion, then I would say a little look to the future is often quite nice. So if it's an essay about earthquakes, which is what I've been talking about mostly, there is a prediction that sometime this century we will have an earthquake that kills 1 million people or more. So the world population is increasing. We have more people living in earthquake hazard zones than ever have done before. That's the prediction. If it was something about volcanoes, you could talk about how monitoring and planning is getting better, and theoretically death tolls from volcanic eruptions should be reducing over and over in time. So you could do that. It's not essential, but just a word of advice, if I keep nagging you to write conclusions longer and you're like, I don't know what else to say, maybe a look to the future might be quite useful. Okay, so just some other bits of advice. I don't want to dwell on these. If it's an essay title about impacts or effects or consequences, which are different words for the same thing, could we just remember that they can be positive and negative? We do mostly talk about negative stuff in geography, but just as an example, you know, the 1987 storm, oh, don't know what happened there, that we looked at in the climate module, actually it completely changed weather forecasting, and it's a pretty positive effect. Something really good came out of a horrible situation. So it's just worth reminding yourself. PEES, another acronym to remember. If you are aiming for A star, if you're able to kind of cover those 4 bases, or at least 2 or 3 of them, that is a little show-off opportunity. So you can have economic impacts on kind of building damage and roads being broken and big bridges collapsing. Social impacts are like death, trauma, injury, that sort of stuff. Political would be if the government gets criticised because it didn't handle it very well. And then environmental, you could think about rivers and trees and soil and that sort of stuff. Not essential, but good if you can. And then just a little note about case studies. You do not need to tell the examiner everything you know about a case study. Like little and often is the best way to use them. So yeah. Right, a quick thing about the mark scheme. Now I'm only showing you band 5, which is the top band. We are obviously want to aim high. We might not all quite get to band 5, but at least, we ought to aim high, didn't we? There are 3 areas that you get marks for, and I'm going to summarise them in a minute, and you can obviously pause this screen if you want to. I'm going to summarise it in something that I have completely stolen from Nick. So this, of course, is basted. Nick potentially pronounces that in a slightly different way. I shall leave that to your imagination. But it's his kind of thing. Is it a mnemonic? There we are. It's a mnemonic that helps you remember the mark scheme in a nice, easy to remember way. The S is massive and a $sign because it's the big money. It's where you're going to get, quite a lot of marks. So BA, you need an argument. We've already talked about that. And if possible, can I please emphasise that? If possible, it would be nice if it could be balanced. There are some essay titles where you really don't have much to say on the other side of the argument, but where possible, if you can try and do that. But the other thing that B means is you need a counter argument. You can't have all of the stuff on one side. Okay, there has to be an argument, which we talked about a few minutes ago with the planning. Okay, TED, you need key terms, you need case study evidence, you need a diagram. Can I remind you that the diagram needs to be annotated, so it needs writing around it. The quality of the diagram, thankfully, is not that important. The quality of the annotation is the crucial bit. Now, the big money bit, we have not yet talked about this. The way that we do things in Year 2 geography is we sort of focus on the coursework until it's handed in, and we do a little bit of essay stuff, get coursework out the way, and then we're like, right, this is the extra bit that we want you to put into your essays now. Neither of them are that hard, I promise you. So the big money comes from synoptic links, which means linking to other modules in geography that you have studied, and I've got some examples of that, and specialised concepts. If you are able to do these things, this will take the marks that you're getting for essays currently and it will increase them. Okay, so what do we mean? Please excuse the terrible writing, although actually I was looking at this thinking it's not that different from my handwriting on a whiteboard. So maybe this will give you a sense of familiarity. The 1987 storm, apologies if you're watching this and you've not studied this yet, but it's quite a big case study in the weather and climate module. And I've just put a couple of links to other modules. We study it because it's a low pressure system and it was a very, very powerful wind, sort of 110 miles an hour kind of thing. Well, that wind knocked over 15 million trees, and that very much would have affected the water and carbon cycle, which is a module we learn about in Year 1. So we can take a Year 2 module and we can link it to some Year 1 stuff. It also changed places. In that documentary we were watching, we found out that a place in Kent called Seven Oaks was then One Oak. They obviously didn't change its name, but it changed Seven Oaks. So there's a link to changing places from Year 1. We also find out that after the 1987 storm, the weather forecasting is completely different. And that's partly because it gave everyone a bit of a kick up the backside, frankly, but also because technology improved. We found out that when the 1987 storm happened, the supercomputer that they were using, and it was one of the best computers of its time, but please can I remind you that this is 1987, on average, the computer they were using there has 20% of the capability, that's the word I'm looking for, of your phone. Okay, so the Met Office supercomputer that's trying to help everyone predict the weather had about 20% of the capability of your mobile. Yeah, the supercomputer they've got now is much better. And we've got seafloor cables and globalisation and sharing of knowledge and stuff. So you can take something we've learned in Year 2 and actually it links to quite a lot of other stuff. Or just to give you a different example, the tropical monsoon. We know that, well, you may not have studied it yet, but you will find out that the monsoon climate is massively affected by the Himalayas. Well, the Himalayas are fold mountains created by tectonics. So we have an absolutely obvious link between climate and plate tectonics. Two modules linking together. The monsoon is being massively affected by climate change. Climate change, of course, is largely being caused by the burning of fossil fuels. That's part of the carbon cycle. People have to migrate with the seasons, and also because climate change means that certain parts of India just don't get rain anymore. Excuse me. And people are leaving. There are whole abandoned towns and villages in northern India because people have moved away. That's what being synoptic is, okay? It's taking something and thinking, could I link this to changing places, or could I link this to water and carbon cycles? If you manage to do that, I'd say 2 or 3 times in your essay, you are going to be contributing towards the big money dollar sign. Okay, so that's a new thing. And then the second thing are these, the specialised concepts. They sound tricky, they sound difficult, they're not. They are a whole list of the specialised concepts that Educas, your exam board, recommend. The ones that I've highlighted in yellow are the ones that I think are probably easier at this point in time for you to have a go at. And to be honest, without even trying, most people do hit some of the specialised concepts because it's kind of hard to write a geography essay that doesn't. Scale. We know that some volcanic eruptions only really affect the place that they happen in. Some volcanic eruptions have much wider effects. If we take Tonga, that happened recently, Tonga caused a tsunami, it affected other countries. It was quite a large scale impact actually. Risk, resilience, vulnerability, kind of all part and parcel of the same thing. This comes back to more developed countries usually have better systems to cope, they're less vulnerable, they have better buildings, better planning, more emergency services, whereas less developed countries are not necessarily going to have those things. You could link that quite easily to inequality, the fact that some people will be massively affected by plate tectonic hazards and other people not that much. It depends on the country you live in, the house you live in, those sorts of things. Mitigation and adaptation would be things like trying to monitor and predict volcanic eruptions, tsunami warning systems, nowcasting for earthquakes, that sort of thing. So, because these two things, synoptic and specialised, are new to you, I just want you to have a go at including them in an essay, all right? So I'd like you to have a go at a couple of synoptic links and just a mention of one of these specialised concepts. It might go really well for you, it might feel really natural. Other people might find this a little bit trickier, but I would just like you to have a go. So your second task for Progress Review Week, if you're watching this at other points, obviously this is entirely up to you. I'm quite sure that if you ask nicely, your teacher will mark extra essays for you if you want to practice. So there, yes. But so January 2022, as I'm creating this video, my students all have Progress Review Week, and this is your second task, okay, to write a tectonics essay. There are shed loads of questions to choose from, all right? Oh, don't attempt a climate essay. We're not ready, okay? So there are loads of questions to choose from. You can do any of these that you fancy as long as you've not written it before, okay? Now you can pause the video. I'm going to send you this PowerPoint if I'm teaching you in January 2022, so you'll have these. And I want you to go through a planning process, have a go at answering the question, but this time, in addition to all the other things that we've worked on, can you try and add a couple of synoptic links and some specialised concepts, okay? And we'll see how it goes. very, very quickly, I'm just going to take the first question on this slide and just try to give you a flavour of some of the things I mean. If I was introducing the first essay, my first sentence would be a definition of a hazard, and then I would give some facts and figures generally about earthquakes. Job done, over and done with. My sense of argument is pretty clear. It's going to be, yes, they only cause damage at the local scale, and I would talk about building collapse around the epicentre. I would probably try and talk about surface waves and the damage that they cause. But then my counter argument is going to be, well, hang on a minute, shall we think about tsunamis that get created? You might mention the Boxing Day tsunami or the Japanese tsunami or anything. Obviously, don't go for Tonga, because Tonga was a volcano, not an earthquake. All right, no silly mistakes, please. So divide it up like that and do your best. If you pick one of the other questions, it's exactly the same process. Find something that you can define. As you can probably see, most of them have got the word hazard in, so it's a pretty good first sentence. Best of luck. If you get in a complete pickle about this, then obviously you can drop me an email and I'll reply as soon as I can. Deadlines, etc. will all be in the email that I send you. All right, so well done on all of that, and hope to see you soon.